Hi, I'm Lois Powell. And I'm Susan Schuler, and we're here to share tips, tricks, ideas, and resources to help you discover what's your story.
Hey Lois, how have you been?
Great, Susan. Once again, here we are.
Here we are. You excited for a 3-day weekend? 3 days of genealogy?
3 days of genealogy.
That's my
What a
plan.
better way to be celebrating independence is looking for your ancestors in this country, especially.
Studying the history. Exactly. I think that's great. Good idea. So, most of you know by now that researching genealogy is not a job for a lone wolf or a solitary project. We all need help. My favorite place to go for help is the fan club.
Now there's a big surprise.
Many of you are aware of that. So the fan club could be friends, associates, neighbors, family, associates, neighbors. Also, sometimes it's called cluster research. We talked about this a lot. I want to talk about another piece of it could be the living fan club. My mom, I'll ask her, what do you know about your grandfather? And she'll be like, nothing. And then I had a DNA match and I was like, hey, do you know this lady? And she was like, oh, that's cousin Norman's daughter. So she knows, she doesn't know she knows. So you have to really think of the question and be a little more specific with some living people.
What example is we've got a lady here right now who's been working with us at the library. She was in just yesterday. And we started with her a week ago. And she said she's looking for a particular great-grandparent. She didn't know a lot of information, so we started with what she knew, and we gave her some homework. Well, this week she came in, and she had talked to her sister and brought all kinds of thoughts that they, between talking to each other, said, well, yeah, but do you remember that? And all of a sudden, they started triggering thoughts to give us more data to help her out.
And we think we know the name of the missing relative that we're really trying to find. So that's great. So you bring up an excellent point. Every family has that historian or has that storyteller. And it might not be, the storyteller might not have all the documentation, but they might remember that story of grandpa and what he did that summer. There was no garden crop and things like that. And I love that when you can get those people together with the historian and they kind of feed off each other. And I think that's just a really good way to generate not only some ideas for you for genealogy, but generate interest in other family members.
Absolutely. And you know what? If you go back as you gather your research, revisit those topics with the same people, it gets them very engaged and more thoughts come forward.
Absolutely. And this is a good time for that. If people are having family reunions or get-togethers this summer, now's the time to get together with not only your older relatives, but the younger ones and make sure that they know the stories. And not just your family, the neighbor part is very important. I was very lucky when I was starting genealogy. My aunt lived on a street in my mother's hometown, and she had a neighbor who was probably in her mid to upper 90s. And my aunt said, oh, we should go talk to Grace. And I was like, well, Grace isn't a relative. What's Grace going to do for me? Well, Grace happened to be a neighbor of my great-grandmother. And she knew a lot about my great-grandmother's family and could tell me what kind of person she was. As a contemporary, Grace was a young bride in the neighborhood when my great-grandmother was more of like an established kind of matron of the neighborhood. And she had some great stories.
Very cool.
Yeah. So
how about books, though? When I look at my family, so many people have family Bibles. Yeah. My family doesn't have a family Bible. No. They don't have any historical written down information.
Well, I think we're lucky in this respect now that there might not be the Lois Powell genealogy book out there.
Well, there should be.
Unless you write it, perhaps, for the future. But there's other ways to get that information. And now we're more lucky than ever because we have resources like Google Books and the internet and other places like that. And I wouldn't just search your family names. I would search all your family names on Google Books because you never know what you're going to get. But I would certainly search your family's hometown or the surrounding towns and counties. I would search your family churches. There might be a history of the church. And then maybe if your family had a business or your family worked for a big business, maybe there's a historian or an archivist at that business who's put together some kind of material. We're not talking a bestseller. You're not going to maybe find it at Amazon, or maybe you will find it on Amazon because they have a lot of self-published or very small niche, and even old out of print things. Another great place to look for those kind of books is Abe's Books is another good one, or a Libris is another good one.
And when you talk about Amazon, I had that very luck, but I used a library reference book where I found my family name. When I was researching online, I started there, but one of the libraries in our area had information on Germans coming to America, particularly coming to Western New York. And I started looking at that book and said, So I went over to the library and I opened that book up, and there was one of my family names.
Wow.
And guess what? I went out to Amazon and I went out to Abe's Books, and they both had that book, and I was able to purchase it because I had to have it once I found it. Of course you do. And I have that book at home, and I have since found the name actually in several threads of different information about their arrival and the kind of work they did. So Google Books, library books, old bookstores.
Yeah.
My husband and I, many years ago, were walking through, this is not an old bookstore, but Barnes and Noble. I guess it's getting old now. It's not around much anymore.
Yeah.
And we were in Peoria, Illinois, where he's from, and we were just killing some time. And he saw this book, and he looked at the picture on the cover, and he said, I think that's my family.
And it was.
And we opened the cover up, and there was the family name 2 generations ago and all his family. And so, of course, we had to buy that book too.
I would think so.
So what did you call that once upon a time? Genealogy serendipity.
Genealogy serendipity. This is kind of touches on that, but also the local library. Every library, most libraries have a local history section. And if you're visiting relatives in your hometown or a neighboring hometown, I would pop into the library and see what's in their local history section. I found a book that was the history of a church in my mother's home area. And I remembered that my great-grandmother worked in that church in the early 1900s. It was a locally self-published book. I found the author doing a quick Google search. I sent her an email. She wrote me right back. She went to the dentist in the town where I lived, and we met for lunch, and we had a great little friendship. She brought a lot of the original records that she used to write that book, and showed me a lot of diary entries where my great-grandmother was mentioned working at that church and what she did. And it's information I wouldn't have otherwise. And how else would I find that woman if she didn't write the book and
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So all these little finds.
Yeah.
I know this sounds crazy, but don't forget places like eBay and Craigslist.
Have you had a lot of luck on eBay?
I have not, but I do know people who have.
Including me.
Including you.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. One of my favorite things on eBay is searching for my hometown and my last name. And I found a poster in very good condition of an event that happened at the local high school in 1929. And it was a donkey basketball. And my grandpa was one of the riders. And my uncle was another rider. And then it was the firemen versus the ambulance people with the cops. And on the other team was a good friend of mine's grandpa. And it's really a great piece of local history. That cool I have hanging in now in my house. Yeah.
So look in some of the strange little odd places that you normally would say, oh, there's nothing there.
Yeah. You just never know.
You never know what you're going to run into.
Absolutely.
So I would say family names,
hometowns, churches,
local businesses, schools. These are all good places. And one last example, and I may have used this in the past, but we did stop at a library in my husband's great-grandfather's town. And I went to the local library and said, I'm kind of looking to see if you have anything on the local patriots. And it turned out they had a whole brochure, and his name and his little history was in it.
Oh my God.
So I would never have found that if I hadn't walked in that door.
And that's not something you can go online and look for. You have to be on the ground, boots on the ground, doing your research.
So, and talk about reaching out. How about the local groups? You've got local genealogy groups. We've got Pinellas County, for example, has a genealogy group. Tampa has a genealogy group. Now, they're all intertwined, but there are various genealogy groups in your local area that always should be looked at.
Yeah. Great places for education. I know, especially Pinellas Genealogy. There's multiple classes every day. You could just get a serious education in genealogy just attending their classes. That's not counting all the classes at Palm Harbor or Tarpon or here or anywhere else you go in Pinellas County.
Or I'm sure there's some in Pasco and some of the other
Oh,
carriers
sure,
as well.
I'm sure.
We're just referencing Pinellas at this time.
Well, because we're staying local. Yeah.
But speaking of, let's go outside of local. I mentioned earlier that I found a great grandparent through a library reference book, and then I bought the book. Well, when I bought the book, one of the things it talked about was the Genealogical Society of Western New York.
Ooh.
So I wrote to that historical society, genealogy societies. Many times they're called different things. And I wrote to them and said, here's who I am. Here's what I've done with the book. This is my family. I'm very interested in learning more. Do you have any information? And they have been fantastic. They came back. And of course, you have to join for a small fee. It's $20 a year. It's not a big deal.
Worth every cent.
I get a quarterly newsletter. One of those newsletters happened to be highlighting my family. So now I have a picture of my great-great-grandmother's old house. But I continue to get information from them every quarter. So I'm learning a lot about the transplanting of Germans to Western New York, which most of my family transplanted to Western New York from Germany. So I'm hoping those threads give me other threads to follow.
I have to agree with you, Lois. I've been a member of the Genealogy Society for my home county in New York since I started doing genealogy more than 20 years ago. The most valuable thing I get in the mail every month becomes less and less with mail, but the most valuable thing I get in the mail every month is their newsletter. Now I get it online, but it's chock full. I don't know who's writing this newsletter, but they are fabulous, and they spend a lot of time doing research and really well written articles, and always chock full of information and ideas for me to, like you said, to avenues for research for the future. The other thing about this local group, and maybe you should check out your local group as well, is that since the pandemic, they've been doing their meetings and programs online. So once a month on a Wednesday night, I know that I can watch their meeting, or I can watch their speaker right from the comfort of my couch. I wouldn't be able to do that if they were having their closed meetings.
Especially some people are working and maybe the timing isn't convenient.
Right.
So there's lots of other choices too, because a lot of them do record those too.
Sometimes, yeah. And if you're a member, you do get the
minutes or whatever they call it these days.
Yeah, or the rebroadcast or whatever they're calling it.
They're calling it.
Yeah, but don't discount groups because, I live so far away. One of my most valuable memberships is New York Genealogy, and New York Genealogical and Biographical Society. Very fancy name, but well worth every cent that I pay for it. They have an excellent website, lots of information. If you're doing any kind of research regionally, I think you should look for the Regional Genealogy Society or Historical Society for your group.
And let's talk about Facebook groups. We don't want to forget Facebook groups.
Facebook groups are important.
There's all kinds of Facebook groups. Some of the ones that I've gotten very lucky with, again, my family is German. There are a ton of ethnic-based genealogy groups, Facebook groups about genealogy, including just for translation, for regional areas of Germany, for any number of topics, even religious associated, Lutherans from Germany, for example. So take a look out there and search Facebook for groups. You may have to look at several. Some you'll say, I'm not seeing too much out here that's of interest to me. Others you might start with, and then your interest can expand.
Yeah. A long time ago, I heard somebody refer to all these Facebook groups about towns or nationalities or any kind of historical research as cousin bait. Like, I'm looking for cousins, and this is how I'm going to find them. The other thing is, I find the people in these sites, especially the ones where it's like the olden days and Haverstraw, New York, or whatever those, there's lots of those where if you're looking for old photographs, a lot of people are buying them or finding them in grandma's attic and then posting them and sharing them with people, which I think is really, really generous. And these are also people who are helpful. You ask a question and 10 people stand up to answer you. Absolutely. You still have to be careful that you're getting the right answer, but I think the generosity of these people willing to help each other across the country is just, and sometimes across the world.
And it's another good way to get your family names out of there, because a lot of them want you to post all the names you're researching. So it's another way to get your names out there as well.
Another place I like to post pictures for my own family is Instagram. I like Instagram because it's very visual. It's mostly photos. And when I either I've unearthed a new photo I didn't know I owned, or I finally make a connection where I know who the person is in the photo, or it may be the anniversary of something specific, like my great-grandparents getting married. I'll post that document or I'll post that photo, and then I can share it with cousins who, I have to say, I have 2 cousins now who I think are really interested in genealogy. I don't know that I'm going to take all the credit for that, but I'm sharing it. It's more visual. It's more accessible to younger people, I think. When you tag some people and then you generate a conversation.
And don't forget Dead Fred.
Oh, I love Dead Fred. Do you want to explain Dead Fred? Dead Fred is a website. And lots of people who, like I was talking about, the generous people on Facebook, may be in an antique store or some kind of vintage shop or old bookstore or eBay and come across an old photo. And lots of times it's an old family photo or a really old baby picture, and they'll post it up there with the information from the back of the photo, which is why it's important to label your photographs, people. And then post it up there by last name, so that if you're searching for the Schuler family in Western New York, you could go on there and see if there are any photos matching what your needs are. I know a lot of people who have been able to find photographs of ancestors and relatives this way. People are careless when they're cleaning out grandma's house. They throw those photos, they donate them. They wind up in Goodwill. They wind up anywhere, little flea markets, and people, even documents. I've seen a whole trend of people finding marriage licenses and then doing the research to reunite that marriage record with the family.
Yeah, Dead Fred's been around for years, but it's really picked up in popularity in the last couple of years.
I think it's been a good pandemic activity for people.
Maybe that's it. Yes.
I can speak from personal experience.
So groups don't have to be a physical group you can go to.
No.
They can be a physical group that you see from your couch. They can be just an online site of groups of people. It can be any number of ways when we talk about groups.
I think an important thing to point out too is when you are visiting your hometowns or you're visiting the towns of your ancestors, look for those little museums, historical societies. They might only be open 2 or 3 days a week. They might have a small staff. That staff might be volunteers, but the stuff in there is probably not digitized. You might go in there and say, hey, I'm part of the Rose family from, they used to live in Johnsontown, and they might have stuff for you. It might take a little research in their building, but you're not going to find it any other way.
And a good tip for that is try to do that research before you go, so you know what days they are open or what hours they're open to even get in the door. Now, internationally, you can do that as well. Sometimes it's not as convenient. I happen to be over in Germany in a small town. Unfortunately, a museum that I wanted to go to wasn't open, and I only had that particular day. But what I did was go to the Visitor Information Center, and they had a book there about the area. And although it was in German, there were a lot of pictures and family names that were my family, and I bought it at the Visitor Information Center. Another thing about reaching out is, and we all do it, we're all out there on the sites, whether it's Ancestry or Family Tree or whatever, and we find matches, other families that are doing trees, and we go, look at that, that's a match. And then some people, of course, take the data, and many of us go back and do our own research to support the data.
It's a grain of salt.
But the bigger thing is, reach out to the owner of that particular tree.
That's true, too.
That's a real trick, because you know what? They may reach back. Now, they may not, and I can say there are many have not reached back, but I probably have about a 30 or 40% hit rate.
Do you really?
I probably do.
Oh, because I've never reached out to somebody when I found hints in their tray. Maybe I will consider that now.
And I have done very well with it. I found a 5th to 8th cousin. In fact, that's one of the reasons I was back in Germany. We reached out and talked to each other online. We tried to find the threads of our families, which we did. I had a lot of information that I had gotten. He had information, and we were able to expand our tree. And now we're like 2 old friends. We don't talk much, but he sends me pictures from, his Easter picture of his kids, and I send him pictures. And who would think a cousin? We haven't quite figured out how many generations it is, but we know it's somewhere in the 5th to 8th range, and it's back in the early 1700s.
Well, speaking of 5th to 8th cousin matches, I have a 5th to 8th cousin DNA match that I'm really wanting to work with and find out if we could figure out our mutual ancestor. Do you know the story I'm talking about, Lois Powell?
I can't imagine.
So Lois Powell and I discovered during the pandemic that we are indeed 5th or 8th cousins DNA match. So someday when we have time, quote unquote, we're going to figure that out.
We're going to figure that out. But I have followed up with another also 5th to 8th match.
You have?
Gentleman just recently, actually within the last month, and his last name is Scheuerman, as is my maiden name. Well, it turns out we may or may not be related through the Scheuermans because his 2 generations ago grandmother, no husband was named, and so she took the name Scheuerman, her maiden name, and gave it to her children. So he may or may not be a Scheuerman match, but we have reached out to each other and we have shared each other's lists of family names and our research. And now we are actually trying to triangulate with a couple of other common DNA matches and see if we can maybe come down to exactly where that hook is, because we haven't found it simply. To be honest,
Yeah.
we are distant enough that we haven't found it in names, but he has reached out to a common match and I have reached out to a common match, and we are both hoping right now that perhaps one of those DNA matches will come back and want to join our conversation, and that will help us figure out the data even better. So reach out.
Yeah, that is so exciting. And I have to say that in the area of genealogy, I think of myself as a pretty advanced intermediate researcher. DNA is probably the area that scares me the most. That's the area I know the least about. So I think that's an area where I need some education. And hopefully that's something that we can provide at the library in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I reach out to the matches if we talk online, but can I tell you what centimorgan or what area?
Yeah.
I don't understand any of that. So don't let that scare you.
Yeah.
You know, reach out anyway.
Locally, Denise Manning at the Tarpon Library, I know that she runs one of the DNA groups for the Pinellas Genealogy Society, and she would be a great probably mentor for us if we could get her over here for a little bit, or if somebody had a DNA question, that's where I would refer you. Tarpon Springs Library, Denise Manning, DNA expert.
And then, of course, we already pretty much covered the geographical context I was going to say. And that is, again, if you know the hometown of your ancestor, go to the local historical society, the mayor, or the church. So I think we covered that topic pretty well earlier.
In America and internationally, I think those are really good bets. You're going to find things that you can't find online.
And what we didn't talk about is the local government. In my case, when I talk about that, I found the local mayor.
Mm-hmm.
He had my family name.
Really?
And we reached out, and it turns out that he had already researched a lot of that family chain and was able to give me a whole background back to the 1600s, including all the sources.
Wow. I mean, I can speak for the state of New York, and every town in the state of New York has a town historian. Some of them even have village historians or county historians, and those people know their stuff. So if you're in the area, maybe reach out to one of them and see, what kind of information they have in their office.
That's a good point.
What else is there? What other avenues of research could they send you on or share with you?
That's an excellent point. And then, of course,
East Lake Community Library.
We don't want to forget your local library, specifically East Lake Community Library.
That's right. And why would East Lake Community Library be important now? It's because we're going to starting next Wednesday, July 6th, we're starting library genealogy research assistance. If you look on our website, you'll see that there's a vehicle to make an appointment on our online calendar. Lois Powell will be here every Wednesday to help you get started in the right direction if you're a beginner, or to offer ideas and mentorship to help you with your genealogy and your family research if you're a more advanced researcher. It would be a great way to maybe get some one-on-one direction and guidance and mentorship. And who knows, maybe you'll someday want to be a volunteer at the library to help with genealogy projects.
And I'm very excited to start that. And I'm looking forward to meeting some of you in person. It will be Wednesdays. Be sure to sign up in advance so that we make sure that we can meet with you. I don't want you to show up and perhaps there's somebody else sitting in the chair. So it's from 10 to 12 on Wednesdays. Go online and I would be happy to help everybody. I'm looking forward to hearing more stories.
Excellent. And we're looking forward to doing more things with genealogy, maybe having some more programs, getting some more speakers, and we'd like your ideas. If there's something you want to learn about, please let us know, and we'd be happy to try to facilitate that if we can.
So I think for this podcast, we're in pretty good shape. I hope you reach out to everybody you know.
Absolutely. Have a great 4th of July weekend. Do some genealogy research, and don't forget to sign up if you would like some help. Thanks, Lois.
Thanks, Susan. Bye-bye.